All right, joining me now here on the Matthew Filipowicz Show is Stephanie Kelton. Stephanie is an associate professor and the chair of the Department of Economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. She is an author and the editor of the blog New Economic Perspectives, all of which you can find at stephaniekelton.com. You can also follow her on Twitter at Stephanie Kelton. Stephanie, thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, it's great to be with you.
All right, so Stephanie, you were actually at Netroots Nation in Detroit last week. I also saw you give a talk at the Left Forum, I believe it was back in June. And in the talk, you actually discussed what both conservatives and progressives get wrong when they discuss the economy. I want to spend more time on the progressive side, but because I think most of my listeners are pretty familiar with what's wrong with conservatives. But let's begin. Just give a brief summary of what conservatives get wrong about the economy, and then we can move on to the juicier side for us, which is what we're getting wrong about it.
Okay, so, I think when we talk about the conservative frame on the economy and what conservatives tend to advocate in terms of economic policy for job creation and growth and all that sort of stuff, you know, the focus for them is always on the incentives. So you get support for policies like tax cuts on the so-called job creators that are supposed to incentivize them to go out and hire more workers and produce more stuff. You get arguments on, tax cuts for ordinary folks as well, because the idea for a lot of conservatives is that people just simply aren't willing to join the labor force and go out and become a worker because the tax burden is so onerous and you don't get to keep every dollar you earn. So why would you go out and participate in the labor market, So
Right.
It's the old supply side trickle down economics where you've got to, take away what they perceive as the impediments to job creation and growth, which are mainly high taxes and too much regulation. And so that becomes, the recipe for curing basically everything that's wrong with the economy. Just deregulate it and cut taxes, and the free market will take care of everything else.
And as we've seen, whenever that does happen, it doesn't really work.
Well, no, it doesn't.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not to say that tax cuts, when they're properly targeted, don't work. Of course they do. But the Republicans tend to want to target tax cuts on the folks at the very top, who, of course, are the least likely to turn around and spend the additional income. It's not like they've been putting off replacing the refrigerator because they couldn't afford it, or buying a new car or whatever. When these folks get a tax cut, and I'm talking about the people at the very, very top, the 0.01%, the 0.1%, and they just plow it into real estate, art, bottles of wine, stocks, and so forth. And so this tends not to work to stimulate actual job creation and economic activity very much.
Right. Well, so most of us listening to the show have a pretty good idea of the conservative side. But what was really interesting about your talk is how you discussed what people on the left and progressives get wrong when we're discussing this. And it's really, really interesting. And the framing of it and how we frame when we talk about the economy is pretty disastrous when you look at it, when you step back and look at it. So tell us, what are progressives and us on the left getting wrong when we discuss the economy?
Well, I think at that talk at the Left Forum, I was really focusing in on how we think about and talk about the government's deficit. And so what I did was to basically juxtapose how the conservatives think about deficit spending and how the Democrats talk about and think about the deficit. And it's really not all that different. And that was the point I was trying to get at. Both sides have agreed that deficits are evil, that they ought to be eliminated, that governments are like households. They should live within their means, balance their budgets and all this. They just want to arrive at the same destination via two different paths. The Republicans say, we've got a spending problem. So in order to balance the budget, we've got to slash programs. And of course, entitlements are their favorite choice. So the problem is we spend too much. The left says, no. The problem isn't that we spend too much. The problem is that we don't raise enough revenue. And so the way to get to balanced budgets and all that sort of stuff is to have higher taxes, especially on those at the top. But fundamentally, both sides agree that what we ought to be working to do is reduce government deficits. And I think that's where both sides get it very badly wrong, whether you are cutting spending and adding drag to the economy that way, because every dollar that isn't spent by someone in the economy is a dollar that can't be earned by someone else in the economy. One person's spending is another person's income. You can't cut spending without cutting income. And that's not the way to generate, a healthy, robust economic recovery where businesses are swamped with customers and they're eager to go out and hire more. So the spending route is the wrong route, but so is the higher tax route. I mean, there are good reasons to argue for higher taxes on those at the top, and they have to do with distribution and inequality and the stability of the system itself. When you have such disparities between those at the very top and everyone else, you tend to get more unstable economic outcomes, like, asset price bubbles that burst and then take out the whole economy. So there are good reasons to advocate for higher taxes on those at the top, but not to fall prey to this, false idea that the way to cure the economy is to balance the budget.
So what is the way to cure the economy? And it's really, really, and because you really talk about how our government is in a good position if we chose to be. We actually, as opposed to what's happening in Europe right now, our government is actually in a good position if we actually had the will to try to get people fully employed and actually make our economy grow.
Yeah, so I mean, the simplest way I know how to say it when someone says, what is the way to cure the economy, is just to remind people that capitalism runs on sales. At the end of the day, that's what capitalist economies are. They're market economies, and they do well when the businesses who hire people to work for them have lots and lots of people with income to spend, and they're swamped with customers. And so that's when the system grows and produces and has an incentive to actually hire people. So we need to, as you said, we in the U.S. have a system that if we wanted to use it properly, if we wanted to optimize it, we could get to full employment, and we could have a fully employed economy, and we could be much more productive and have a much more equal distribution of income and all that. And the reason that we're able to do these things is because we're not tied to a gold standard anymore. And I think that's one of the big things that people overlook, that, in 1971, President Nixon took the U.S. off of gold once and for all. So we have today a monetary system that opened up for us a whole lot of space, policy space, that's now available, that wasn't available when you essentially, I'm going to stretch it a little bit here, but you had to go dig a shiny metal rock out of the ground in order to be able to do anything. We don't have to do that anymore. We've got modern money. And we aren't hamstrung by that, the famous Williams Jennings Bryan speech about the cross of gold. We're not on the cross of gold anymore, but we act like we're still hamstrung by that old type of monetary system that wouldn't allow governments to spend more on education, infrastructure, technology, innovation, all of the things that really are what drive long-term economic prosperity. So we don't do those things because somehow we're afraid that we're going to end up like Greece, that the Chinese have all the dollars, and that's where U.S. money comes from. And if China won't lend us any dollars, then we can't afford to spend, that we're burdening our grandchildren because we've got a $17 trillion debt. I mean, we've got all of these impediments in the way of allowing us to do what we could be doing.